So I'm Jonathan Carter, the founder of CAD Accounting Solutions Professional Corporation. I've been a member, or I was a member of the inaugural Intuit Accountants Council. And I've had a long-standing relationship with Intuit, and most recently was helping beta on a feature that should be coming to profile soon. It didn't come with the last update. I was hoping it would, but it'll be coming soon. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it. It's really nothing too big or exciting, but anyway. So I was the recipient of the 2018 Inspire Accountant Award. That was for contributions to the future of the industry. I'm an Elite Pro Advisor, QBO Advanced Certified. All our team requires being QBO Basic Certified, except for people who do not touch QBO at all, and there's only one of those in the firm. And was named Insightful Accountant Top 100 in 2021 through 2024. Well, actually, I guess 2024 is not technically top 100. It's top 50 international pro advisors. And then last year, we were lucky enough to be awarded the CPB Firm of the Year. And this year, one of our team members was awarded the new Professional Leader of the Year. And we're extraordinarily proud of her. We do work with several cloud bookkeeping firms as a trusted advisor, and we are considered thought leaders in technology and accounting. And I enjoy working with technology companies, though our business has not really grown only in that direction. So before we get too far, we're going to be talking about very exciting, very technical things. Now, this relates to Canada. I don't know all the rules in the United States, but I do know that the general withholding tax rule, and we'll talk about that there. And this is really not just for people who are considering offshoring themselves, but also keeping an eye on the books of your clients. And when there might be a withholding tax situation or you need to look something up. So, can I just get like a raise of hands within Zoom? How many people have encountered situations where they had questions about withholding tax? One, two, three. Only three. Okay. Well, I do think we're going to see it more and more, especially as people leverage virtual assistants, for instance. A great way to map your processes is to have a virtual assistant shadow you while you're going through it, take notes, and then use those notes to create a process. And then you can, review, revise, and implement that process into your system. I think this is something we're going to see more and more. So we encountered this because we do have an employee in the Philippines. She's technically a subcontractor, but she is in the Philippines, so we are subject to a tax treaty and withholding tax. So that's something that we've encountered. And you might also encounter this if you does anybody, for a quick show of hands, who does personal taxes here? Just a few. Okay. So if you've ever encountered, say, an expat or a foreign individual who is renting out a property in Canada, that might be a situation where you're faced with withholding tax considerations and requiring to give guidance. So I hope that this is very interactive. Please interrupt me as we go for any questions. So we're going to start by talking about withholding tax. Then we're going to talk a little bit about tax treaties and then a little bit about offshoring considerations and the ways you might see that. So I've already mentioned the virtual assistant. We have a bookkeeper who is located offshore. These are some things you might see, but there could be others as well. So poll question number one. Please allow all panelists to vote. I know we run into that issue quite often. Yeah. You have to read.
And everybody in as panelists, so they should be able to vote. If you can't, let me know, and then I have to end and relaunch it.
I can't.
Okay. Let me go and then relaunch. Launch poll.
I was able to answer it.
Why are you so special?
It looks like I can't answer it either, Jonathan. So it's
So
just
you're
showing I
hosting,
can't.
so you would be like Tanya, wouldn't you?
Oh,
That's
okay.
why. Yeah, but everybody else can.
So do you want me to
By the way, the
answer it
poll doesn't
again?
match the slide. The poll does not match the slide.
Okay, Tanya did this. Hang on.
Let's refresh and revise.
Okay.
Get everybody their CPD. It's worth taking a beat.
The poll answers the slide. What are you talking about?
No, I'm seeing the first one is when working with a foreign business, a business must. That's the first selection.
Oh, that's the first option.
Oh,
Yeah,
But
the first option.
no.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I see.
A. When
It's just the wording is
close-
wrong. Look at the
Yeah.
look at A.
Look at
And
A,
look at
always withhold, and you with
contract.
A on that one is when working with a foreign vendor, a business must. It's repeating the top line.
well, just
Except-
answer something else, then you're still gonna get your credit.
Yes, as long as everybody answers, you still get your credit.
We'll laugh at
Uh-huh.
Tanya later.
Tanya put it all in there, and then she's like, "Yep,
It's not going
you
to
don't
the
have to do
CRA,
anything,
Ross. You're
Sandra."
okay.
Okay. So has everybody? I guess everybody has answered. Okay.
Jonathan, you're stirring it up already. And Sandra, come on.
All right, so we did have 5 of 10 responses. Review the vendor's location, the related tax treaty. I would say that would come secondary to considering the responsibility to the CRA. I do think it is important to pay the bills as part of that as well. So I like C and D as well. But you might have a different situation where you don't need to consider a tax treaty. So for instance, anybody here using Microsoft or Google, right? Like most of us are, but we're not doing withholding tax on those kind of bills. So these are the situations where you need to consider and look at it. So this is just a very, very broad scope. So fees for services provided by individuals, that is the most common. So that's what we have to do with our team member in the Philippines. Dividends issued to foreign parties. That is something that you guys might encounter. So having that shareholder register up to date and knowing when withholding taxes are required and what to do with them is going to be important if you have a larger client who has vendors or who has shareholders who are not in Canada. Now, they can have shareholders who are not in Canada and still be a Canadian controlled private corporations. Absolutely possible. Related party interest payments. So like say you have, I don't know, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of one of those underhanded things that I've heard of. Let's say you have a trust that loans money to a startup business and then charges an exorbitant amount of interest rate. So the business is never paying tax in the jurisdiction, but it's just constantly paying interest to this trust. This withholding tax is designed to ensure that the local jurisdiction gets some tax revenue from that business, because that has been known to happen where they just essentially open a business, run it until it's bankrupt it, open a new business and do the same thing. And all the money is flowing offshore in the forms of loan interest. So that is something that's important to note. You might see this with if you have like a US company controlling a Canadian company or something like that, or even like just a shareholder offshore. There could be situations like that as well.
And there's no government bodies that can control this kind of loophole way of stealing all.
Well, that's why the withholding tax is there.
Yeah.
However, as we've seen from such things as, the Panama Papers, there are a lot of things out there that the government just has no control on knowing about. When you think about the sheer volume of information that's out there regarding businesses and the variety of jurisdictions there are, I mean, I don't think it's really possible in today's environment for any one body to understand everything that's available out there. So.
No.
And then, of course, certain management and technical service fees that could be very specific. So if you feel that might apply, that's something to look at. So let's say, for instance, you have a Canadian entity that charges that is being charged, shared service fees from a foreign entity. That might apply. So it's worth digging in and getting a bit of understanding about that. Any questions, comments, ideas about this?
Just one. It's a big deal with oil and gas royalties.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Music royalties, we've seen that.
Yeah.
You know, there could be other things too, right? Like anything from authors royalties, franchise royalties, all kinds of different things that could create this withholding tax situation. I don't think there's really a good um,
Any virtual company.
any virtual company that's not in your jurisdiction, sure.
Yeah, like I've got, well, the company you're gonna be doing the T2s for, we're gonna have to deal with that.
Because they're
hired-
using,
She hired somebody in the Philippines
yep,
as
there
an
you are.
EA.
Yep.
So
So is
now
this
I
just
gotta
for
fix that.
offshore companies or people, like I have a client that their franchisor is in California and they pay royalties and stuff to them for the various different entities of the business.
I think in that situation, you're going to have to look very closely at the franchise agreement. And of course, the tax treaty. I think so that's in the US.
Yeah, California.
All right, well, we'll be pulling up the link for the tax treaties, and these slides have been provided in PDF form, and the links are active as of a few days ago. So
Okay.
you should be
Okay.
able to click on
I'm just
there.
curious because I know and I'm not saying it in a slighting way, but it is the brother-in-law that's the accountant doing the year ends, and he should be retired. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So like those kind of related party concerns, the threats to independence and objectivity, like those are something that you should probably be discussing with the client and making sure that they're protected. Because in the end, I mean, the brother-in-law might be doing them a short-term favor for long-term pain, right? So that's something to keep in mind. All right, going to move on. So withholding tax amounts, they're usually determined by the tax treaty associated with it. And every tax treaty is a little bit different. So Carol, in your case, with the franchisee-franchisor relationship and the royalties there, it's worth looking at that tax treaty to see what it has to say about those specific instances. Now, deadlines are going to be important, and we're going to get to that. But let's just say every country is a little bit different. Every different type of payment could have a different rate of withholding tax. PwC has quite a good list on their website that gives you a good general overview of the different types of payments. Most notably, it does not include fees for service. So that it's more about dividends, royalties, and interest payments. So the most common one that you see is 15%, but that is not always true. It's important to look up that tax treaty. If there is no tax treaty, the withholding tax is 25%, period. So I did see something come up in the chat. There we are.
Sorry, that was me, Jonathan. That was
Oh.
just a link to the Ministry of
Put up the
Finance.
tax treaty.
That's me.
Nice. Getting ahead of the game.
Why not?
So for instance, unfortunately, I'm just being 100% straightforward here. We were offside at a point. We ended up giving a very large raise to our team member in the Philippines with the understanding that this large raise is all going to the tax and that she will be able to claim that using her T4A-NR as supporting documentation to show that she's paid that tax here, so she won't have to pay that tax again in the Philippines. So the deadlines, and this is something that is quite concerning. It's the 15th of the following month. So if interest payments are going every month, then withholding taxes need to be remitted by the 15th of the following month every month. If you have somebody who's only being paid once in a blue moon, the 15th of the following month, those withholding taxes need to be submitted. This is the general rule. I have not looked into a lot of detail for larger investment companies and things like that. As a Canadian tax preparer and Canadian tax preparer, I think I said that twice. We do sometimes see withholding tax on forms from the IRS, and you'll note that it's 15% is what gets withheld there. It usually has to do with investments like dividends. So these are some of the forms and their due dates when they're required to be submitted. So T4 NR, that's the fees for service. It could be a variety of other things. I mean, it could be a scholarship. It could be a bursary. It could be any of those things that appear on a T4A, there could be an NR component if it's required. The T3 is typically for interest and T5 is typically for dividends, though there you could see interest on the T5. And then the NR4, the statement of withholding tax, that's something that's, if the others don't apply. Note that there are other forms, and this is not inclusive. So you might be required to set something up at the very beginning, like this NR6 that I've listed here. This actually has to be set up at the beginning to help the CRA understand the withholding tax process. I feel like I'm speaking a whole whack of accountanese. I'm getting a lot of shaking heads. So are there any questions right now? Any concerns or anything like that?
What about
Jonathan, when you mentioned the one you were offside with when you had paid the person in the Philippines gave them the raise to cover the taxes, I kind of missed part of that. So the amount that you gave as the raise was specifically for the Canadian taxes that were due on wages that had already been received. Is that correct?
No, moving forward. And unfortunately, we had to eat going backward.
Got it.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask that's the
Now,
same question I just had. I was asking is because of the person in the Philippines for the marketing company that we share.
Yeah.
We haven't been doing any of that, so we're gonna have to get that fixed. So she's gonna have to eat that.
yeah, and that's something that has to happen on the regular basis, right? And it should probably be written into any future subcontractor agreements that your clients are signing with foreign entities, that taxes will be withheld according to the relevant tax treaty and remitted to the CRA. Tax slip will be issued and you are able to claim that based on your tax treaty
there
against
yeah,
taxes.
yeah, because she's obviously paid in Philippine pesos, but at a Canadian rate, and she's paid very well in the Philippines.
Yeah, and that is something that can happen.
She gets like
Uh,
1,500 Canadian a month.
if you do find yourself offside, an option that's out there is voluntary disclosures. Another option that's out there is taxpayer relief. They tend to be a lot less forgiving with taxpayer relief than they do with voluntary disclosures. But
Yep.
voluntary disclosures, I've heard secondhand. So I don't know, I did not hear this from the CRA, but I've heard that it can put kind of a mark on the client file with the CRA indicating that they've been through a voluntary disclosure and that if the
You only get
agent
one.
doesn't, pardon,
You only get one.
it depends on the matter.
Yeah.
Like you can't do a voluntary disclosure for failure to file and pay HST multiple times.
Yeah.
But let's say you had that issue and then you had another issue down the road that was completely different. I believe you can still apply. Steve, you look like you wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm just enjoying it. I was going to ask you though, it's just a little bit off. When with the foreign worker situation, when we're paying the withholding tax, the 15, 25, whatever it may be, and it goes to CRA. Now, I was just curious. So that means that each country can actually submit to CRA and say, hey, we want that money back. Is that really how it goes in the long run?
No, the
I thought it
tax
was kind of
stays, I believe, and haven't investigated this in depth. I believe the tax stays in the jurisdiction, but then the individual doesn't have to pay that amount of tax in their home jurisdiction.
Sorry, I understand totally how it works for the individual, but I was saying, and something really, really weird, but okay, so we're giving the tax, the withholding tax that is being withheld for that particular person, and we're submitting it to CRA, right? Now, does the Philippines have the claim on that 15%? Because normally they're actually giving their citizen or their resident the discount because of what they paid to Canada. Do they actually get to claim that tax? Because they are
I
owed that
honestly
tax.
don't know.
I thought it was just cute, cute to
That
think
is
it.
that is an interesting
Don't
question.
even, yeah. Let's not even
I
go there.
can't even
It's just kind of
imagine
interesting.
trying to navigate that like
I
as part of the
wouldn't even
CRA.
want to.
Like, and how
All
would you
right.
even, right? Like,
Sorry,
well,
Jonathan. I didn't mean to get you
no,
off
no
there.
worries. We could go down a rabbit hole there, that's for sure.
Oh boy, could we ever.
Yeah. Any other questions or things that people want to talk about at this point? Okay. So the tax treaties are constantly changing. They do get updated when they're ratified. So that link that Steve shared, and I'll be sharing that in a little bit, that is available. Now, it is very important to keep an eye on the news for sanctions. And if you have customers working with countries that are at risk or on a sanctions list, you really need to exercise your professional judgment, dig in, look at what this means, look if they are allowed to make payments to those foreign jurisdictions, because sometimes sanctions are narrow, sometimes sanctions are broad, but it can be completely disruptive. Like, for instance, there was a good number of North American entities using Russian software engineers, and all of a sudden, Russia invaded Ukraine, and that became a major issue. You know, there are some payments that can go to Iran still, but then there are some that cannot, right? So it's very important to kind of understand your customer's involvement in that. Waiting until like the end of the year and dumping it on the accountant is not the best policy because as we've seen, the payments are due much earlier, and a decision needs to be made very early in the relationship of how these matters are going to be handled. So when you find a situation, it's best to have a look at sanctions if there are any, and then look at the tax treaties to see if there's how what your responsibilities are or what the customer's responsibilities are to the CRA. We're okay? All right, I was worried this would be a very dry topic and not a lot of information. So there's two key links here. One is the withholding tax guidebook, and then that's T4061, and then the tax treaties, which Steve also shared. Now, I believe the IRS has similar information. I just did not look it up. So offshoring was part of a panel I got to be at and CPB Ignite. And essentially, you know, you can offshore to an individual, you can offshore to a firm. A lot of them are setting up domestic corporations to handle all the mess and make it easier for the Canadian companies to do business with them. So they handle all the payroll, they handle all the withholding tax issues and things like that. When you're working with a firm located in Canada, there's no impact on the way you do business. You're just paying the bill. If you're offshoring to a foreign entity, you definitely need to look at the treaty. In most cases, there is not going to be withholding tax, but it depends on the structure of that entity, right? Whether it's a corporation, whether it's an individual, because if it's an individual, you definitely need to do the withholding tax. There could also be complications from local regulations and requirements, which makes it a little bit trickier, again, if you're going to go with an offshore firm. Is anybody here offshoring besides me? Is there, let's get into it a bit. Is there something holding you back?
We looked at it a couple times, Jonathan, and when you're saying offshoring, with regard to staffing and assistance and different things. So we did twice now. We actually had a discussion with a company yesterday out in New York. And the biggest thing for us seems to be that their focus on US businesses, US tax, US everything. And we're trying to do everything end to end. So from the data entry, the bookkeeping, the accounting, the tax. And if we're trying to get one of those pieces to help us out, it really is difficult when they don't understand the end product. Like the end result is going to be Canadian tax returns. End result is going to be Canadian withholding tax or pardon me, Canadian input tax credits or value added tax. So, and then of course, everything seems to be in US dollars. We haven't found a significant financial benefit, like business benefit to doing it. I don't know if that was just us looking in the area we did. That was India, Pakistan. We haven't checked in the Philippines, and Singapore was the other one that we checked. But again, that's been our experience.
Interesting. That brings us right to the global events. I don't know if anybody saw, but Singapore had an election recently, and their leader is now a Marxist. So that could result in some legal changes that might impact people who are offshoring into Singapore. So it's something to keep an eye on. I agree with you, Steve. One of the biggest challenges that we have is different jurisdictions have different requirements, and different, even within Canada, different organizations have different ethics with regards to how they're going to do bookkeeping processes, right? I mean, we've had this, I see Carol nodding, I see Karen nodding, I see Sandra nodding. Yeah, we've had this discussion. Ross is nodding. Yeah, we've had this discussion a few times. But yeah, that is a challenge. Like, I mean, our first offshoring experience, we sent the information off, the people had done cash coding and had done a quick method of HST, even though the company involved had not elected to do and did not qualify for the quick method of calculating HST. So we had to send it all for rework. And that was, we didn't get a break on that. We had to pay them to do it once, and then we had to pay them to correct it. So really there was no cost savings there. One of the things that would really help is to have very good type processes and training and to make them part of your team. So Candace, our girl in the Philippines, she's been with us since 2017. She's done a lot of work to learn and to understand Canadian tax situations. And she's now to the point where she's going to start training new bookkeepers as we bring them in, to support her. Actually, we're going to be bringing people in, and that's kind of an odd situation too, right? Where we have an offshore employee who is kind of directing onshore employees on how to do the work. So that's going to be kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, I agree with you on that one. The processes are vital for having a successful offshore relationship and training. Karen keeps opening her mouth and looking like she wants to say something, but she's on mute.
No, I'm gasping for air. But we're in a different situation here because I have such a good group, very highly trained accountants. I've been so lucky here. But we decided not to go offshoring for the simple principle of buying local. You know how that came out during COVID?
Yep.
We saw so many disconnects, particularly with our e-commerce clients, shipping disconnects mostly. And some of those clients deal with people in the Philippines. I'll tell you, the Philippine accountants are mostly fabulous. But there were some major disconnects, and that's why we decided to buy local.
And do you find that you're getting a higher quality of candidate locally, or is it just? It's just
Well,
part
I
of
really haven't had to hire, to be honest, because like I said, we're all actually ex-Encannans. We come from Encana, and we've just decided to work together. So I don't particularly have to look at hiring anybody anytime soon.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's really
there isn't enough diversity in our group, let's be honest. But at the same time, I've got such a good group, I don't need to add to it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a great place to be.
it really is. I'm blessed.
Another risk to offshoring is beyond the geopolitical events, such as an election, changing laws, sanctions, could be natural disasters. So we had that impact us. Candace was out for 5 weeks. Well, what do? If we treat her the same as we would treat a Canadian employee. And if a Canadian employee was unable to work because of a natural disaster, we would still pay them. So we still paid her. And that was very important for her coming through that hole and not in debt. Nicole, what's up?
Hi. As I don't want to take this too off topic if you have more slides, but I'm a CPB.
Let's go off topic because
okay.
I'm almost at the end of the presentation and we're like,
okay. Because I've been approached about offshoring, and I do bookkeeping, I shouldn't say just bookkeeping, but that's my practice is we're bookkeepers, and I'm a CPB. And I just noticed I really should put my designation behind my name. So of course I've gone to different, webinars or different events, and everyone's talking about, hire bookkeepers in Philippines or different areas. And this has always been my concern. And maybe you guys can tell me how you get around this. Obviously processes. I deal with a lot of my vertical is technology companies. So I get to know their vendors really well. But sometimes, let's say, from company ABC, the bill comes in. Well, I know for this client, 60% goes here, 40% goes here, because I know how they're running their business, and we want to allocate 60% of the cost to their recurring revenue COGS, and the other 40% is an internal expense because they're using it internally. I feel like trying to explain all that to someone with just a list of vendors would be difficult. And I'm thinking, if I'm just going to send them a list of vendors saying, when you see ABC company, put it in this GL. When you see this, put it in this GL. I might as well just set up rules in QuickBooks, and once a month go in and fix all the stuff that's wrong. How do you get around that, them knowing the nuances of your clients, I guess?
So it's funny. I'm going to use an onshore example because we have one client that is they're definitely the largest client by revenue, but we have a very narrow engagement with them. We essentially only do their accounts payable.
Okay.
And there are approval trees. There are, like, before the invoice can even be published from Dex to QuickBooks to RBC PayEdge for payment. There are approvals that are required, and depending on the dollar amount, the approvals may vary, and depending on where the cost is originating, how it's allocated may vary. So what we did was we created a bunch of cheat sheets that essentially list all the vendors, and whenever a new vendor comes in, our team member goes to the director of finance and says, hey, this vendor is new. Just want to check on who's approving and where this should go and so on and so forth. And it's worked really well for us. And that team member is actually taking a 2-week vacation to go visit family. And so our backup has been training for the last 2 months to help support when she's gone. So she doesn't, A, the client has no disruption in service, and B, the team member, when they come back, isn't coming back to a mountain. But those cheat sheets and processes, and then having the cross training really helped identify gaps. So that really, really helped. Another thing that we've been able to do with that client is to free up some of the CEO's time, because until recently he was approving every bill over $1,000. This is a company with about 15 billion in assets under management. So let's just say that a lot of the bills are over $1,000, right? So it was causing delays and angry vendors and disrupted relationships. But more importantly, it was eating up a lot of company time as people were responding to those vendors and so on. So yeah, I don't know. It's probably not the answer you want to hear, but it's what we did and it really helped.
Okay, so it sounds like you obviously still have to put in some kind of effort into training these individuals. They don't just take over your books and go, we know what to do. You have to say, this
If
client,
they say
these are the
that, do
nuances.
not believe them.
Okay, all
Don't.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the same amount of
They're
training
gonna
you put
say
into
they
a
know.
local person, you would put into someone that's offshore. The only difference is they are actually offshore.
Yeah,
Okay,
100%. And I think it's a lot of people will say they know what to do, and they do know what to do for their jurisdiction or
Right.
for the US,
okay,
right? But they might not know what to do for Canada, UK,
Okay.
something like that.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Steve. So-
Something that, and thanks, and Nicole, that really, it helped with a lot of what we were thinking of too, like the processes and how do we do it. But Jonathan, one of the challenges I have in this, whether we're hiring internal or we're looking to do that, is the confidentiality of the data that we're giving them. And just in your example, when you're saying yes, you give them, the client that they're dealing with has all of these other vendors of theirs that are there. Like, what process do you use for a foreign worker, somebody from a different area that has to deal with your confidential information? And what can you enforce it? Standard NDA, or what do you do?
Well, I mean, in our
Or is it a
subcontractor,
concern? Is it a
yeah,
concern?
of course. And it is a concern. And let's be honest here. If that employee was here, they could still steal data just as easily. Right? So this is not a challenge that is unique to using an offshore employee. Yes, we have an NDA. We also adhere to the CPA code of conduct. As a registered CPA firm, that is a requirement. We do have training annually. We have in the onboarding, and then annually, we have a revisit of certain things, and that's one of them. But one that's actually also, I would say, even more important is internet security, technology security,
Mm.
right? So we do have everything in the cloud. We have a policy of nothing on hard drives. We understand that sometimes things do need to be downloaded to hard drives, but that downloads folders to be purged daily. And I mean, there's not much more you can do other than trust people, right? If you're working with a larger firm, they may have, because they have a higher turnover, they have more people in and out of their firm, they're a bigger target. So they might have, more advanced security, such as, you walk in to your locker room, that's where your phone goes. That's, you're in essentially a Faraday cage where the only connection to the outside world is through your cloud services, which are extremely monitored, and you can't bring in a flash drive or leave a flash drive. There's security checking on the way in and the way out. I know some of the larger places in the Philippines do work that way, and same in India. And I've had some interesting conversations, but in the end, let's be honest, if somebody is going to steal your data, it doesn't matter where they are.
No, good point. And it sounds similar, Jonathan, what you've done to what Karen was mentioning with her area of employees that she trusts that are there. Same things could go wrong. You could still have that same problem. But something that you did say that was different, that was unique to me, is you just started talking about the organizations. And that's what we ended up doing is we looked at the organizations. It seems like when you're offshoring, you have hired a person. So you are able to treat them as an employee. You are able to train them as Nicole would do, or Karen would do, or Ross, or anybody. And does that give you more, um, control's not the right word, but comfort, ability to do what you did as far as when the storm hit, and give her
All right.
wages during you couldn't with the company? Is that help?
There's a bit of a caveat.
Yeah.
So Candace is my right hand's cousin.
Ah,
So there was already
thanks
a
a
high
lot. Hide the lead here. Way to go.
Yeah, that was, you're really
there,
hiding the lead on that one, Jonathan.
sorry. There was a high degree of trust, which is why we entered into that relationship instead of going through a firm. There are firms out there who will essentially headhunt and place people with you, and it's a one-time fee, and then you are responsible for that employee moving forward. Some of the challenges are like when Candace went down for 5 weeks due to a typhoon. Like we had to have backfill in there. We had to have cross training in there so that our customers were still getting served and she wasn't coming back to a mountain and things like that. When you're hiring an individual using a headhunter, or if you're hiring a team member through an organization, that team member leaves and you got to start back at square one with training and everything.
That is the same though as if when Karen was talking earlier about she has her group. If one of them goes down, you would have to either spread the work around or backfill or do whatever. It doesn't sound like it's anything different. It sounds like you're just extending to get some benefits from the offshore employee. Am I getting that right? Is the overall concept behind it?
I would agree with that. The one thing I will say is the organization that you're working with, you might want to check them on Glassdoor, right? And see what the employees have to say. Does everybody know Glassdoor? Sorry, I need to call.
No.
So
I'm just
Glassdoor,
Sorry, Jonathan, I was just gonna jump in for a quick second because we also used offshoring as well. And even though I know that Jonathan's person that he uses offshore was a connection and whatnot, kind of what you're getting to, Steve, is that yes, with a firm, because we did use a firm, we found that using a firm, they tend to kind of do things their way. Even though I was the one doing the training and everything else, and they were to come to me within their own firm, their process is that they actually, if they're unsure of something, they kind of discuss it with like their manager or teammate or whatever. So I think there was a bit of a disconnect that way. When we were actually training, because, and you're right, they do go by a lot of the US stuff, even though I was trying to train them on the Canadian, and kind of they were able to go through the tax academy that Tanya had and whatever, so they can see some of the Canadian stuff. They really did follow the US, and there wasn't as much control over what we were teaching them opposed to what was in their own firm, opposed to going with an individual. Sorry,
And this
Jonathan.
glass door thing, is that part, or that's what you use? Sorry, Sandra, when you're getting on that, it sounded like you also did some research on the employees that you were getting or the company itself. Is that glass door thing something that I've never heard
So
of it. I don't know what it is.
Glassdoor is essentially an employee review site for businesses. So you can go there and you can search up, like, if you have a new client or a new prospect, it's probably a good idea to check them on Glassdoor. If they're really small, there's probably nothing there. But if they're, if they've had, hundreds of employees over the year, there might be. It's an area where people can go and look for jobs or place jobs, and it's really more about being a good employer. But you can see like some disastrous reviews from individuals on Glassdoor. It is global. I have not actually, and this could be tricky as well, is following the trail to who are they actually employed by, right? Like you might have hired company A in Canada, who is hiring company B in India that you've never heard of to hire these people, right? So understanding how that works, the names of those companies will give you a little bit of intelligence that you can look up and do some snooping around to see what you see. But if there's a high turnover, then you're constantly going to have this training issue, right? They work for that company, they don't work for you. They could get promoted within that company, and now you're training somebody new again. The interests between your company and the provider can come into conflict. So that's something to keep in mind if you're considering offshore. I
And
think
actually,
we're
I
having
think that's a consideration for anybody in any location
Yeah.
who's working remotely, because they don't have that face-to-face communication. You don't have a chance to build the trust as thoroughly as if you have them in the office.
That was leading
There
into
are some
something.
things you can do to create a positive culture. I think we're doing a pretty good job here. Kata, I do know that some of the larger firms that have significant remote employees have a lot of problems with time theft and have a lot of problems with double dipping, where people like have two jobs and they're clocked into both and only work. Of course, they're not giving you 100% clocked into somebody else as well.
Yeah, there's ways around that though. You can set goals instead of time.
Yeah, because that was my worries. Like I've looked at this and like, how do you stop them from cycling through constant new employees all the time? Because
I can't hear you very
Sorry,
well, Ross.
sorry, how do you, that was the one thing I was worried about. If I'm looking at this, how do you stop them from cycling through employees all the time? Because retention level in some of these places is atrocious.
Yeah, some of them can
So,
be good.
so
And some of them, it depends on the relationship. And frankly, I think it's like choosing your service provider, right?
like I've
And
heard
and
stories
making,
where that they got a new bookkeeper every month and a half to 2 months.
yeah. And I mean, let's put this like for your customers, even if you were doing that here in Canada, that would be very frustrating for your customers.
Yeah.
Because now they have a new relationship to establish. They have a new person they're working with. And establishing those personal relationships is really what can make the information flow really well with our customers. All right, well, let's have a quick look at some of the benefits. We've talked about some of this stuff before. Work is always being done. That's kind of a neat thing. So when we have a Monday deadline, well, that's, Monday morning is 9 p.m. in the Philippines or 8 p.m. depending on the time difference, right? So the work can be done and prepped and ready for 9 a.m. on Monday morning, even though it might not be submitted until Friday afternoon. You can often get access to highly skilled labor. Candace was a tier 2 customer service rep for QuickBooks Desktop. That's where we found her. And we paid her slightly more than what she was getting at that call center, which of course was, a subcontractor to Intuit. And her rate was cheaper. Now we have given her significant raises. She's still not at minimum wage in Canada, but she's making almost double what she was making when she was working for Intuit. Sometimes when a team member leaves, it's easier to transition. So if you're working with a larger firm, they can bring somebody into that seat. That doesn't mean the training and friction there is going to be gone, but you don't have to be like, oh crap, I just got 2 weeks notice. I need to find somebody today. You don't have that desperate hire situation. Most importantly, I got this from Rachel Fish, is it really allows your business to scale quickly if you've got a fast-paced growth plan. And so that was something that her and I had a very interesting conversation about. And of course, in order to scale quickly, you need good training materials and good training programs. So some of the challenges, I've got my little wildfire going here. Asynchronous communication. Does everybody know what that is? Okay, so essentially, if Candace gets up, it's 9 a.m. for her, she sends me a message, it's 9 p.m. for me. Now I have Slack on my phone, but I have no expectation that employees are going to be checking Slack on the regular. So if that's for somebody else, she might not get an answer for nearly 12 hours, right? If it's something that's time sensitive, we have phones. Phones can be called, but we try to be respectful of each other during our off hours. The standards issue is probably the biggest risk and challenge, and that everyone always defaulting to what they know. But that happens to us with the last two CPAs that we had working here. They defaulted to what they know. They went completely off book, like with our processes and so on. And we're very resistant to following processes or to adhering to new ideas, right? So again, the type processes are a 100% requirement if you want to be successful here. And then we've talked about that they might switch out the person in the seat who's serving you without any notice or change to you. And then, of course, we talked about the other events, technology, security, geopolitics, and so on. So last question, just to get your CPD. Absolutely 100% subjective. I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from COVID. And thank you very much, Sherry. Yeah, sorry, that was not Singapore, it was Sri Lanka, where they elected the Marxist president, I believe it was.
Got 9 out of 9. So one more person we're waiting on. We'll give them a few seconds and then I'll end the poll.
Quick, get your CPD.
Nope. Okay.
I'm curious about these responses. I know what Karen's is going to be. More than half say no. Interesting. Nobody really wants to work with a foreign offshoring firm. Also interesting. So this is
Unless
some
Ontario is considered foreign.
It most certainly is.
it's just the center. It's the
I've-
center of the universe, is it not?
I've gone from a no, absolutely not to I will consider it from this right now.
Yeah.
But before this, I was an absolutely not, and I will not deal with anyone that's been harassing me for the last 6 months.
Yeah, that can be very frustrating.
Oh,
It's like what I find is very good in those situations is just tell them, like, listen, I'm not interested in offshoring, and that will usually end it.
it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't. Although fortunately, I've got a guy that's in my Chamber of Commerce. So if I do it, I will probably start talking to him first. Because there's a person I can physically talk to here.
Yeah.
He's a member of my Chamber of Commerce.
But that's a Canadian,
Canadian
I'm
firm.
assuming from that
Canadian
poll
firm.
question that there are Canadian firms that do this. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes, this is a
I
firm here.
Absolutely.
was not aware.
Yeah, I've got his business card at home somewhere, and yeah.
So just the quick summary we talked about withholding tax and so stuff to keep an eye out for you and your clients. Where to find tax treaties and that they rule. So like that's really the governing document. We talked a bit about sanctions and then some offshoring considerations. So I thought this was a good quote. Stephen Covey, everyone knows who he was. Offshoring is inevitable. I don't think it's necessarily treating people like things. And I think that is just in general. I mean, we've changed Candace's life. She's putting her girl through university. She works from home and doesn't have to commute. She's being able to buy a car. She never owned a car before. Like there's a lot of ways we've really impacted her life in a positive manner. From my philosophical standpoint, I am still trying to build a very positive culture here domestically. So I'm less interested in offshoring because I find it harder, especially if you're working with a firm. How do you make that person part of your team culture? Right? How do you do that? Because they're the master of, they have two masters. And that's not really good in effect in building the culture. We might want to treat them one way, but ultimately they're working for somebody else. Right? So that's kind of the consideration. I am going to be going through and learning about this headhunting company that will get somebody out of the Philippines for 4,000 USD to become a part of your team. I'm curious about that. So I'm meeting with them. I think it's tonight, actually. Well, any questions, comments, considerations? Jonathan, you're ridiculous. You forgot about this.
No, it's
Well,
very
Jonathan-
enlightening.
Extremely.
And Jonathan, you're building a good culture and a good team just with us here. You know, every time you speak to us, we just love it. So this
And
is
I'm
great.
glad to.
thanks.
Good information.
Like this has been insightful and and educational at the same time. So yeah.
Here's
I'm glad.
another,
I'm glad.
sorry, there's another consideration when it's not exactly offshoring, but there's an awful lot of immigrants coming to Canada. I'd much
Yeah.
rather hire them. Give them a
You know,
chance
Amna,
to start here.
our team member Amna,
Mhm.
who won the new professional leader of the year with CPB this past couple weeks, she was associate professor of accounting at Karachi University.
That's the
And
person you
nobody would
want.
hire her for an
Mhm.
entry level role because she had no Canadian experience and she had a gap on her resume.
Yeah.
And boy, did we get somebody absolutely amazing. And I mean, like theoretically, she is one of our strongest team members in the entire organization from a theory standpoint. So I agree with you. The No Key Kwe program or Shunya program we used that we found her, that was a great program because it and going through the colleges can be very helpful for those junior
Mhm.
level people because sometimes like I don't believe in unpaid internships, but there are unpaid internships around. We won't do that and we won't pay minimum wage. So like even if we brought somebody like that on board, we'd be paying them at least $1 more than minimum wage. There's grants and other subsidies to help assist with that. And there's some really good candidates. When we went through this No Key Kwe program, we interviewed 5. I wanted to hire 3 of them, but I couldn't. I just didn't have the budget for it. So
Jonathan, the No Key Kwe program, that was the one that was sent out probably about a year ago with and that's a native organization in Ontario, if I remember correctly. Is that the right one?
yeah, it's down in
Yeah.
London.
Okay,
Uh,
we had trouble getting a hold of them, but that was something we thought of too. Did you have like with that and with the other ones that you mentioned, some of the organizations and you mentioned some government grants? This to me is just a huge topic that that maybe you can do in the future. Because wow, we just trying anything. We've the route that you mentioned about individuals from different companies. We had somebody through our website. He had been an accountant in Nigeria and contacted us out of the blue and said, "Well, I'd like to work for free for you." I'm like, "Well, we'll hire you for like we're not going to pay like we'll pay you our regular wage, but come on in." And wow, as you've described, we've had just excellent success. But I don't know where to go to find other individuals that have that background, that experience, other than international designations. I don't know.
I would start with your local immigration organizations. Because they're going to be able to direct you to the talent. They're going to be able to direct you to the schools or to the other programs that are going to help you find these individuals who can be extremely valuable to your organization. It's funny that you mentioned that because one of the people who we've got lined up for an interview is from Nigeria. He is not a qualified accountant or bookkeeper, but he has a business administration degree from here in Canada. And so like, he's same thing. Like he's getting these terrible jobs that just don't have any future or upside to them. So we're going to interview him and see what that. Yeah, so to tell a story from our personal life, Sherry's sharing some situations here. So my mother-in-law has a doctorate from Nairobi, but when she came here, she was cleaning houses. Her
Mm.
brother-in-law, doctorate in wildlife management in Kenya, which has one of the biggest biodiversities in the world, came here and was driving Uber. Yeah, I agree with you. We need to do more to support immigrants coming in and creating real careers and
Yeah.
not just being disregarded because they're not real Canadians. And I hate that freaking phrase.
Yeah, there's
No,
like
and years ago, I had a condo that I rented out, and there was two, and a husband and wife. They came from South Africa. He was a mechanic, heavy duty mechanic, and she was an accountant, like fully degreed. And neither of them could get jobs. He got a job working at Volkswagen as a mechanic, but of course, right at the bottom. And she couldn't get a job as an accountant. So, and that was how I found out, because I said, well, how can I? She goes, well, here's the number to my bank manager. He can guarantee that we have enough money to pay. Well, the guy just said, yeah, you got nothing to worry about. Can't give you specifics, but you got nothing to worry about. So I took it at face value. But yeah, I mean, they had tons of money. You know, they wanted to move their bedroom furniture all teak because they loved it. They paid for that move from South Africa to Coquitlam. So
That'd be thousands of dollars for sure.
yeah, but as far as getting jobs, like she said, she couldn't get a job because, again, didn't know Canadian tax law. But I really wish there was something for those individuals that had not like a fast track, or I mean, if it, I don't know, it just, yeah, there has to be something, because it's just a waste. And it's not that there wasn't enough people here. Everybody has
Government
to have
D
something.
finally did that, Carol. They finally did that last year, but it was too
Oh.
little, too late. Still not. They put
And
in a
it's-
new policy to change legislation
Yeah,
to
but it's-
allow for doctors, lawyers, accountants, anyone with a specialty whatsoever to. They recommended that the organizations, such as CPA, ABC, allow for foreign designations. Still hasn't happened though.
no, I was gonna say
Oh,
it's a
And that's
completely
absurd because the
ineffective law.
engineers do it.
It's a
Say
completely
again?
ineffective law.
Sure.
Nothing's being done with it. It's
Mm.
ineffective. Totally, utterly ineffective, because we're still, like, as somebody just said, nurses still sitting at home that are trained in foreign countries that can't practice here.
crazy.
It's like the body's the body.
Yeah.
Doesn't change. Doesn't change.
No,
Color
we-
might
dentist-
change,
we-
but that's
we-
about it.
with the doctor.
Well, yeah, that's called aging, but anyways, but yeah, but the dentist comment too.
We don't want to talk about stuff like that.
The other thing is, though, that there are grants that we can access to allow us to bring in people who are coming out of school or newly immigrated, and I'm wondering if we should sort of share those opportunities to, about
I
those
think that's a
grants.
great idea.
Yeah,
I
I think
hear about them all the time, but I've never been able to find them. You guys have both mentioned, Jonathan and Karen, you both mentioned them, and I think around the room I see nodding, but I've never been able to find anything that was applicable to finding bookkeeping, accounting, tax, individuals.
EI, there's a limited
Service-
grant for retraining people in E EI.
There's also the BC job grant, which is what I'm working on right now, because I'm putting my new employee through the trifold bookkeeper advisors program. So she can be more than just my data management, because she's like a crackerjack. I give her something, she just boom, done. Okay.
Don't we all want employees like that, right?
I know. So that will be an immense thing for me. And she's just like a sponge for knowledge, and just like boom, 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 boom. So
BC
even that
job
part
grant,
where you said, Jonathan,
EI.
for all your people have the pro advisor basic certification. Once she takes that, I mean, she'll get both of those, I'm sure, really quickly.
Huey, you said you're an immigrant. Did you have challenges?
Would you mind sharing?
Yeah, so when I moved here, I moved at the time when I was going to have a baby. So I was going to be home anyways. But in order for me to take advantage of qualification, certification, sorry, my daughter is just fussy. In order for me to take my certification for the CPA, I was told that I was going to need tax laws. Sorry, Canadian tax law. I wrote Nigerian there. So I had to take that, and being that I was a stay-at-home mom, and the time I used Athabasca, so it worked out well. And then when my kid was ready to go to school, then I took a role with PwC. Thankfully, though, I came as an experienced Deloitte professional, so it was easy for me to convert that to working with PwC in Calgary. So it worked out just fine. And then from there, I transitioned to the Auditor General's Office of Alberta and then became a bookkeeper. So all of my professional career was somewhat grounded in audit. And since I had the Canadian tax law done, then I'm not sure whether I became employable, but that has been my journey here. Yeah.
You're here in
And how,
Calgary.
Yes, I'm in Calgary.
Me too.
And
Hi.
and at the time I just recalled, when I was ready to go back to work, I was trying to find work. Of course, I threw my applications to multiple companies. I think 50 plus at the time. I could only get to work with a medical office as a bookkeeper. Of course, I got burned, and I swore that I will never do bookkeeping. But when I decided to try out bookkeeping again, this time my approach was to, hang out in communities like this and learn from people's experiences who were burned like me to know how to do it right this time. So that's how I've done it through, immigrating from my country to be in Canada.
I'm just curious, how long did that essentially set back your career, having to go through some qualification hoops here in Canada?
Okay, so honestly, I got back into career 2017. And so I moved to Canada in 2014. By the time I left Nigeria, I was already working like in a managerial role. So when I took the bookkeeping role, of course, I was earning, very, very poorly. My total income at the time in 2017 was about $600 a month. So when I moved to PwC, I had to take an entry level role. And then when I transitioned to the government's office, I had to take an entry role again. So it honestly, the journey has taught me a lot, and I didn't end up getting my CPA. Just didn't work out after 4 years. So that I was so desperate. And so in 2022, when I became pregnant again, I knew I wasn't supposed to go back to the workforce because, again, I've not made headways. As at the time I left the government office, I wasn't even back at the managerial role. So those have been, some of the challenges that I've faced. But in all of these journeys, it has taught me a lot. But I haven't been able to break away. So the challenge of leaving my country, the challenge of being a mom on multiple occasions set me back. One, my first time it was about 4 years, and then my second time about 1 year. Because I was before I took on the opportunity of becoming a bookkeeper. So
So it sounds to me like you've never gotten back to that stage where
no,
you were.
no, no.
I think that's like a pretty common tale.
Mm,
And love to
Mhm.
see, I'd love to see businesses in Canada do more to support that.
mm.
Um,
And to embrace diversity. Damn it.
Given what you know now, Yui, if you had to go back to 2014 or whenever it was, would you still come to Canada or would you stay at home?
The circumstances that left me to come to Canada was basically my husband. He had a dream to want to do this, and he's in the IT world, and he was really good at it, right? So I hated where I lived in Nigeria. I hated it so much that I thought Canada would be, a better compromise than than being where I was, because it was either Canada or I was going to choose the location where he was, doing very well and progressing. And he wasn't even home, with me. He wasn't home as much. So I chose Canada, because it was a better option for my living situation at the time. And yeah, and between the both of us in our careers, honestly, he's progressed so much that sometimes we cannot possibly relate when we talk to each other. So, for example, when I was, throwing out my resumes to 50 plus entities, right? He couldn't relate with me because when he ultimately moved to Canada, he was just transferred, and he was transferred on a much more higher role, earning six figures since he moved here. So I went from six figures to zero, and I've not been back at six figures. So, so
Yet.
is
Yet.
yeah, yet. I haven't been back at six figures yet, but it was just interesting. So I think my situation was a matter of compromise, for family and sacrifice for family. But again, also, I'm thankful that I haven't gotten to the point where I'm resentful, looking at my spouse as my spouse, not saying it as a partnership, because it's hard not to get there, especially when we're having conversations in which he cannot relate.
Full disclosure,
Yeah.
I'm an immigrant as well too, but I mostly grew up here. But Calgary's a tough city.
I've heard. Are we going to see you, Uyi? Are we going to see you next year at CPB Ignite?
Oh, sure, sure. I
Yes,
still have FOMO for
definitely.
missing it. Yeah, I still have, and continuously, you should see me. I'm 100% responsible for my baby because I'm trying to get to the point where I can, access childcare and stuff like that. So I've had to take some, back seats, but I'm on the right track, so I should be there going forward.
James's mom can set up a daycare.
I'm not going to speak for her on that one. I know that that's a trap. So, well, I definitely think this has been a very interesting conversation. We are about 15 minutes over. I will be respectful of everyone's time, and I need to.
I got
Ironic-
payroll to run. Payday Friday.
I got an
Yeah.
engagement. I got
Don't
an
forget,
engagement
because
agreement for
Monday's
this
a
drop-in.
holiday.
Oh, yeah, right. I
Monday
forgot.
is a stat.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Monday is a stat. So if you
Thanksgiving.
have
Which one? Oh, is it?
Thanksgiving.
I thought that wasn't until the week
Reconciliation
after.
Orange
No,
shirt day.
no, this is the Truth and Reconciliation Day, September 30th.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
The new
I
stat.
Ontario.
don't believe we have that here.
I don't
Okay, well, you might not, but we do in BC, so I don't have a choice.
think we have it
I
in
thought it was a federal
Ontario.
holiday.
It's a federal, but it's not a provincial.
Canadian.
Not in BC.
It's federal.
Federal. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah.
But it's not a stat day here in Ontario, is it, Jonathan?
No, it's not. It's,
No, I
it
didn't think
is.
It's
so.
not a stat, but it's a
No.
federal. So the banks are
Yeah.
closed, federal
Yeah.
offices are closed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're doing
The rest
direct
of us-
deposit, that will also not work either.
Yep.
Exactly.
So you're running payroll, it has to be done for the 27th.
Yeah, and I'm just migrating somebody
The
to Wage
banks will
Point
not
right
pay it
now.
on the 30th.
Fortunately, the payroll's next Friday. Thank God.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have 3 semi-monthlies, so, well, and a bi-weekly that happens to be this week, which would be Friday anyway, so.
Yeah.
All good. Anyways, have a great day. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank
Have
you.
a
See
good
you
day,
fellas all
everyone.
later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you
Bye.
Friday. Bye.